Hey, Larken Rose here. Wanted to do a video about mushy-headed thinking. I'm not sure what else to call it. I'll have to think of a better title than that. The fact that most people's thought process is so vague, it's usually emotion-driven, it's usually not specific. I constantly talk about clarity of thought and clarity of communication, clarity of language, because those two go together. If your brain patterns and your thought patterns aren't really specific in what it is that you're condoning, what it is that you're saying, your communication sucks and your ability to be manipulated and deceived goes through the roof, as demonstrated by almost everybody. I'm going to mention a little thing from the novel version of the Jones Plantation. The link will be below for how to get copies of that, where Mr. Smith is talking to Mr. Johnson, and he says, I can always find a way to sell them a hopeful, comforting story and convince them not to believe what they see with their own eyes. And then Mr. Johnson responds, the way you describe it, it almost sounds like witchcraft. And Mr. Smith chuckles and says, there's a fine line between persuasion and black magic. And there is, and most people miss it. They don't get that most of the things they believe and most of the things they say are mushy-headed deception. And I'll use two examples to make sure I offend everybody political, left and right, and even some pro-freedom people who have residual status garbage rattling around inside their head. So, it's in the news, Republicans are talking about it very loudly, that some very horrible crime was committed by an illegal alien, somebody in the country without the written permission of the ruling class. And their response is, look at this case that happened of something really horrible. So, of course, everybody is going to be against that and probably going to be emotional upset because it's something really horrible. And as a result of that, we're going to cheer for authoritarian violence being used against a giant category of people that would include that guy, illegal immigrants, because this happened, this guy did something, so let's have authoritarian power in the form of border controls and closing the border and have, Nazi checkpoints at the borders and close all of that because of this thing over here. And you can see Republicans getting emotional, and I actually don't blame them for getting emotional about something really bad that happened. But that emotionalism makes them really susceptible to manipulation to the point where it's like, well, that person in that group did something bad, therefore that justifies authoritarian aggression against this entire category because of what some of the individuals in that category have done. We're going to call that border control. Okay? What is that argument analogous to? Gun control. It's what the left always does. We had this horrible shooting over here. Somebody killed kids in a school. So horrible, so traumatic, so tragic. Naturally going to make people emotional and upset and angry. And then the political left is going to do exactly what the political right does when it comes to borders, which is say, this individual or a few individuals did really nasty things, so we need to use authoritarian violence against the category of people called gun owners, because if we don't disarm them all or steal their assault weapons or whatever level of government coercion they're talking about, whatever level of gun violence they're talking about, because gun control is gun violence every single time, their excuse for that is this bad thing happened. And their target isn't the people who did that. Their target is a giant category, because that's how government gets power. If government only used power and only claimed power against actual aggressors, they wouldn't have the power over anybody else. Like, they wouldn't be able to tax anybody. They wouldn't be able to regulate anything. Like, they could only use defensive force against actual aggressors, which all of us have the right to use that force. They wouldn't be government. If you're not an aggressor, they wouldn't have any power over you. So to get power over you, they have to point to individuals doing something really bad, like shooting up a school. We're going to disarm you by force with common sense gun control, blah, blah, blah. This entire category of people called gun owners, we're going to use authoritarian violence against them. And our excuse will be that person did something really, really bad, which is exactly the same mentality and exactly the same logic, or lack thereof, as border controls. Let's keep harping on this story about an illegal immigrant doing something totally horrible and use that as an excuse to initiate violence against millions of people we don't know for stepping across an arbitrary, completely illegitimate line known as the national border. Now, somebody steps on your private property, you have the right to make them leave by any means necessary. You don't own half a continent. Why I need to keep explaining that to supposedly pro-freedom people is beyond me. But the fact that the exact same mushy-headed, manipulative, fear-mongering bullshit works on both sides and is used by both sides shows how important it is for people to have clarity of thought. Republicans don't have clarity of thought. Democrats don't have clarity of thought. Nobody who advocates government of any kind has clarity of thought, because without fail, automatically, inherently, they have to be advocating widespread violent aggression against innocent people in the name of accomplishing some good, like stopping bad people or helping the poor or building roads or whatever it is. But they have to mushify it in their own head to remove the literal reality and think in terms of these vague emotional things of like, illegal immigrants are doing this. Okay, I guarantee that the same week that that horrible thing happened done by an illegal immigrant, something just as horrible was done by somebody who was born and grew up in the U.S. and is a U.S. citizen. So does that mean it's time to forcibly, like, evict from the country everybody in the country because people in that category also did something horribly nasty? Well, nobody would think that. Nobody would fall for that because that's stupid. Thing is, it's no more stupid than blaming all the people trying to walk across the line for what one guy over here did, or two different individuals, or 100 different individuals out of however millions are walking over the line in the same way and for the exact same reason that it's absolutely immoral to threaten to forcibly disarm a bunch of people because of what one guy with a gun did over here, or two people over here, or a total of 10 or 100 or whatever it is, to violently punish millions of people who didn't threaten or harm anybody because one person did something bad. The only people who fall for that, which is almost everybody, is people who are mushy-headed enough that they can't stay clear in their head about principles and logic. And they do the pack mentality thing. And so they are willing to blame and punish a category of people for what some of the individuals in that group have done. And that is what government always feeds off of. Because to have power over giant categories of people, like, people aren't just going to volunteer for that for no reason. But if you say this is for the common good, we have to disarm everybody to prevent like this and this and this from happening. We have to have, fascist Nazi checkpoints and keep everybody out of the country to avoid this and this and this. So the fact that it's illegal to murder people, like, that didn't work. You think making it illegal to come into the country would have magically worked for that particular individual? And you think that initiating violence against a huge number of other people who had nothing to do with that's okay? Just like forcibly disarming a huge number of people who own firearms and haven't threatened or harmed anybody? Well, we have to do that because reasonable gun control. The left and the right are the same. They're both mushy-headed collectivists who will fall for manipulative crap because they don't have clarity of thought and they don't think in terms of principles and they don't think in terms of specifics. They think in terms of vague, mushy silliness. And you can see it in their terminology. So I'll give the second example. The left loves to talk about the insurrection that happened a few years ago on January 6th, a date which will live in triviality because it didn't matter in the slightest, and it wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't anything. It was a stupid frat party of a bunch of idiots who wanted a different clown on the throne. So I'm not at all on their side. It was colossally stupid and accomplished exactly nothing, but it wasn't an insurrection. But if you can stick the label of insurrection on it and say over and over and over again, insurrection, insurrection, insurrectionist, insurrection, 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 it will bypass the ability to think of a lot of people, namely everybody who's a Democrat who calls it an insurrection when it wasn't one. Because if you can make them call something an insurrection that absolutely in no way was an insurrection, then that changes their brain and what they are willing to support and advocate. We have to put an end to this because of insurrection. Yeah, except it wasn't that. That's a total ridiculous lie. But it's a lie that serves those in power. You can't say, a bunch of people temporarily trespassing, and they were sort of let in anyway, and most of them didn't do anything, and they didn't threaten anything or threaten anyone or break anything. They just wandered around, staying between the velvet ropes, and then they left, and then we prosecuted a zillion of them using actual violence to cage a whole bunch of people, which is way worse than what they did, which was like minor trespassing on government property, and government has no right to own anything anyway. But that's a different issue. But if you can over and over and over again call that an insurrection, which is just laughably stupid, where you had an insurrection, we forgot to bring guns. You're supposed to bring guns. Darn it. Oh, well, we'll just barge in. I'm sure they'll just give us the government. Nobody was thinking that. Nobody was intending that. That's never at all what it was. But if you can say the word over and over again, it can make people go, that's something I'm scared of. Government power. We need government power. We need to do something about it. So, what's the Republican version of that? Invasion. This is an invasion. It's an invasion. It's an invasion. They're crossing the border. It's an invasion. This is an invasion. This is an invasion. We need government. It's not an invasion, you dumbasses. It's people walking across a line. They're not armed. They're not organized. They're not attacking you. They're people walking across an arbitrary line that doesn't matter. It's not an invasion. But they have to keep using the word to rile up mushy-headed statist morons to get them to cheer for more authoritarian aggression. So they call it an invasion. The Republicans go invasion, invasion, invasion. Democrats go insurrection, insurrection, insurrection. Both of them are lying their asses off. It wasn't an insurrection. It's not an invasion. It's just stupid. But if you can use stupid emotional terminology until people believe it and they repeat it, and they're out there talking about this invasion. It's not an invasion. It's people walking over a line. Like, invasion means something. Like, if they come over with tanks and rifles, by the way, like the U.S. military does all over the planet constantly, like, if anybody is not if you're going to be pack mentality and nationalist, and you want to complain about an invasion, and you're an American, name any country that does more actual invasions of other countries than the U.S. military. There isn't one anywhere. But they have to pretend it's an invasion. They have to use terminology that's made to rile people up and scare people. And the left does it, calling it an insurrection. The right does it, calling it an invasion. They're both full of shit. And Mr. Smith knows how that works. And he explains how that works. And it's one of the things that it's really sad to watch, especially people who imagine themselves to be pro-freedom falling for this crap, letting their emotions shut off their rational thought to the point that they're cheering for violent aggression against other people. Now, if you still believe that anybody in government is talking about the invasion and immigration crisis because they care about, like, the victims of that in any way, shape, or form, whether it's an illegal immigrant taking somebody's gerbs or somebody violently attack. If you think any politician cares about any of that, you're just delusional. They're riling you up because they know you'll care about an innocent person being attacked over there. They couldn't care less. They don't give a shit. Nobody in Congress gives the slightest shit if somebody is tortured and murdered. They do not care at all. But they know that you care, and they know that they can use your emotions to rile you up to get you to cheer for authoritarian power under the guise of preventing that bad thing. Is it going to prevent that bad thing? No, absolutely not. Do they know that? Yeah, they know it. Same thing with gun control. They know that gun control literally makes crime go up. They don't care. They go out there and have their press conferences. This was a tragedy, these children being killed at the school. They don't care. The politicians don't give a shit about dead children. They see it as an opportunity to grab power because they know that decent, moral human beings like you care about dead children and get emotional because it's horrible. Normal non-psychopaths tend to get emotional about innocent people being victimized. And the political parasites know that your emotionalism makes you very susceptible to being manipulated into cheering for more power for them and less freedom for you, because that is every government solution to everything. Border controls and tariffs and yada yada and nationalistic stupidity is a limitation on your freedom and lots of other people's freedom. There's nothing moral about it, and there's nothing beneficial about it. Even if you play the emotional game of, oh my gosh, see all these scary people are coming here. And it's the same thing with gun control. They don't care about the victims. They know it makes crime worse. They just don't want a population capable of forcibly resisting their thugs when they push things too far. That is absolutely the only reason they push for, like, we need to ban assault weapons. Like, they're used in like 0% of crime. Why is it that you guys constantly harp on that and constantly do the fear-mongering and emotionalism of somebody over here used a firearm, used an AR-15 to kill innocent kids, which the FBI probably set up and he was totally on drugs anyway. We're not going to mention any of that, but we're going to mention the death and scariness because we want to steal those guns. Why? They're used in such a tiny percentage of crimes. Oh, because they work really well to resist government tyranny. So that's why they don't want you to have them. It has nothing to do with giving a crap about children. It's the U.S. government. They're in charge of the U.S. military. How many little children do they have to blow up on the other side of the world for you to stop imagining they give a shit about children anywhere? They don't care. They will use the fact that you care and the fact that you're not very good at thinking clearly and specifically to scare you into cheering for more power for them. And that's, Mr. Smith knows all about it. And he gives some lessons to Mr. Jones and Mr. Johnson about how that works. And it's frustrating enough to watch normal people fall for that. Every Democrat does. Every Republican does. They all do, all the time. It's especially frustrating to watch people who imagine themselves to be pro-freedom, but who can still be scared into A, cheering for statist authoritarian power, and then B, making excuses for it and pretending I'm pro-freedom because the collective of taxpayers kind of owns the country and I'm going to fabricate this lame-ass excuse for personally advocating violent aggression against anybody trying to cross a line, including Americans trying to cross a line. I just came back from Mexico, had to go through the fascist checkpoint and all that silliness, as I've done before. Why do I have to go through that? Why do I have to show the papers to come into my own country? My own country. Because lots of people, including some supposedly pro-freedom people, we need border controls. Okay, that means you get less freedom and government gets more power. And that's the only reason they're pushing the fear-mongering. Same thing with gun control, same thing with literally everything government does. Climate change. Whether you think climate change is real or not, and it's not anywhere near the problem, basically it's bullshit. Whether you think that or not, if you think government is concerned about that because they're concerned about people's futures, you're just delusional. They're using your fear and your emotion to trick you into cheering for authoritarian solutions that don't solve anything except solve the problem of you having too much freedom, them not having enough power. And so one of the things, I really hope to, like the Jones Plantation movie and then the Jones Plantation novel that can get into more detail of it, I really wish more and more people would become familiar with the tricks enough so that they remember them even when they're emotional, even when there's a story on the news of some illegal immigrant did something horrible. oh, well, then we need to initiate violence against millions of people who had nothing to do with that. No, we don't. We absolutely need to use defensive violence against the individuals who would do that, whether they're ones with badges or ones without. The right of self-defense, the right of the people to be armed to defend themselves and each other, that's really damn important. That's one of the reasons that freedom should exist, of normal people being armed. And government doesn't give a crap about that. You know, they talk about these school shootings and we need more gun control. Are you going to mention the fact that the school shootings are all happening in gun-free zones where you already disarm the people? No, they will never mention that. Because if they admitted that, then the solution is less government power and more freedom. Like, let people have guns. Let somebody in the school have a firearm with them so it stops. And by the way, there have been attempted school shootings that stopped very quickly and didn't happen because somebody with a gun stopped it. And I don't mean cops. So it's frustrating that even people who seem to understand things philosophically can still be emotionally manipulated. And the number of ways that can be done, as long as somebody can't think clearly in principles, is pretty much unlimited. There's so many ways to deceive and manipulate people. This book covers a few of them, but there's so many more. Oh, speaking of which, I need to get the second edition of How to Be a Successful Tyrant out, because that describes a lot more of them, because there are many, many. So if you are faced with scary things and your response is to advocate some authoritarian solution, just for now, just because it's necessary, just because right now it's really, really important, so heck with like principles or logic or any of that, I would ask you again to do what I always ask people to do: be literal and personal and specific about describing what it is that you condone. If you hear a story about some horrible thing being done by an illegal immigrant, okay, put yourself at the border. Now there's a family walking across. You don't know anything about them. It's just some random family trying to walk across the line, and you have a gun. Do you have the right to use violence to stop them from coming from here to there? Not onto private property, just onto some place that's in the U.S. It's claimed by the U.S. ruling class as part of their territory. Are you justified in initiating violence against these people who are just walking across the line and you don't know anything about them? Or if you're a Democrat and you're super upset by this school shooting over here, oh my gosh, we need gun control. Okay, if there's some random person who hasn't threatened or harmed anybody, like me, for example, who owns an AR-15, what do you want to have done to that person if they don't disarm? Actually, literally describe the violence you want initiated against people who haven't threatened or harmed anybody under the policies that you condone as a result of you getting scared and emotional and upset and irrational. Because if people just did that, just had to do that and describe the reality of what they're condoning, then more and more people would think twice, and then more and more people would start to see through the games played by the slavesmiths of the world. Until then, a bunch of mushy-headed people are going to keep cheering for authoritarian power because they're upset and because they don't understand how they've been manipulated and deceived and played as pawns. Yeehaw.